So welcome to this workshop 9. This is to discuss the CEDR Biodiversity Project and invasive species project. So CEDR commissioned 2 projects, 1 in each, and now there's a 3rd project to write the final report, which is going to be short and to the point, and just have the recommendations. So I'll ask each of the panelists to say who you are, what organization you're from, and to say something to get the conversation started.
Hello. I'm from the Swiss Federal Road Office. I'm responsible for the environmental standards for the highways. And I just like to remind everybody that the people who do the maintenance on highways are not gardeners. And they work in a very difficult environment. And so we need to provide them the tools to do better work in terms of biodiversity. We can't just tell them, do better work. We really have to give them those tools. When you give them the tools, they are motivated.
Hello, I'm Elke Hahn from Austria. I work in the Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Mobility, Energy, Innovation and Technology. Sorry, I mixed it around, but that's the topics. I work there as an EIA coordinator in motorway projects. And when we started this project, for me, the big question was if we increase biodiversity at the verges, if that increases a trap effect, but it seems that there is no evidence for that.
My name is Pia Bartels. I'm from the German Federal Highway Research Institute, also known as BAST to maybe some of you. I work there mainly with biodiversity issues, invasive species, and more recently also with climate change. And I'm also working with other institutions that are subordinate to the ministry, so we do a lot of work together with the railway and with the waterways. And I couldn't agree more with what Margaret said. I think, despite of these people not being experts that are out on the roads, we need some kind of monitoring system, an easy one, but some kind of monitoring system so that these people have at least a rough idea what kind of habitat they are having in front of them.
Yeah, and I'm Anders Sjölund from Sweden, the Swedish Transport Administration. I've been working there since 1997, actually. And I've been working with biodiversity, of course, as a senior advisor and also coordinating our work with biodiversity. I have initiated and also led a lot of research projects over the years and also made some guidelines and a lot of stuff. And this is the end of my career. So this is perhaps the last thing I will do.
Okay, I'm Hans-Martin Hanslin. I'm a researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research, where I work mainly with the restoration ecology, urban ecology, and road ecology. Yeah, and I've led one of these projects, the EPICroads projects, in this CEDR call.
My name is Twan Morel. I'm working as a senior advisor at Rijkswaterstaat, the National Road Authority, and I'm responsible for enhancing biodiversity in verges. And one of my opinions is to policymakers that enhancing biodiversity on itself is already a good goal, but it has also something to do with climate change adaptation. So if the verges are well managed, you have also profits of having some resilience against all kind of problems that occur with climate change.
Okay, so no pressure on the audience, but you're a small group, almost smaller than the panel. And it's over to you now, so we need to hear your opinions.
Well, it's the thing about the people who has to maintain the roadsides. We shouldn't always think them as not wanting to learn more. And this is again an example from Denmark. They are working on species-rich road verges, and they asked the normal people to do it because they couldn't do otherwise. But then they also asked the company, the maintenance company, if they wanted to educate their people to know more about biodiversity and plant species, and they were positive about it. So we should also take that into account. It's not just us. Of course, we need to take into account that some people, they're not willing to learn more, but because we have a biodiversity crisis, also ordinary people, they are worried, so they want to learn more about it. So we should take that into consideration too, that well, keep it simple, but still, well, ordinary people also want to learn. That was just a comment.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. You're raising a good point. I mean, we did a survey about invasive species among all the road maintenance depots. And one of the things that came out was that a lot of people wanted more information on that because they have problems with it, but they don't know how to deal with it. So they really were, I think it was like 60% of the people that participated, they explicitly stated that they would like to have more information. And with the biodiversity, we have like a similar, we didn't do it among all the maintenance depots, we just picked randomly some out. And it was exactly the same response. They really want to do something, but mostly they're restricted by costs and resources. But yeah, I agree. And I think it would be very good if we could include this kind of training already, when they do their training for being in the maintenance field. In Germany, it's done for people that work on waterways. They actually have education in ecology even. So we could see that also from the survey that they were really much more knowledgeable. So when we asked about what kind of problems they had, they gave answers like, they are threatened biodiversity or they competing with other species. We got none of these answers from the road maintenance. So they get this kind of basic education. For road maintenance, they definitely don't, at least until now. We hope that we're going to include that at some point. And I don't know how it is with railways. I don't think that they will get it, or that they get it either.
Oops. Yes, I completely agree. Writing guidelines is a start, but what is really important for maintenance and biodiversity on verges is training the people. And one of the big problems we have in Switzerland is that the crews change a lot. The personnel is not very stable. So it's trying to find training tools that are adapted to that situation. So for instance, we're working on podcasts, which I hope I will finish at some point before I retire.
Yes, Tuan.
Of course, data is interesting, and you have to know what's out there in the road verges. We have, I don't know if you listened to the lighting presentations today. There was from Holland, from Netherlands. They have a survey that they do every 4th year. We do something similar, and we have an idea of how to maintain these road verges. But we don't do it ourselves. We have a procurement. And what we don't do is that we check that the entrepreneurs do what we expect them to do. So we can see that our roadworthies, although we have maybe a good plan for maintenance, it's not really done as we have expected, because they can cheat and earn money. So that's a problem also.
Sorry. Joanne.
In addition to your question, Annemarie, in Holland we have the same construction as Anders told, like in Sweden. Constructors are mowing our verges, and they don't always do what we want them to do. So we have green management plans, which should indicate at what time and how many times they should mow. But these contractors are not taught to how to do it and what kind of things are important. So we are trying to find a standard for contractors, but that's a discussion. If you can ask a contractor if he has a color standard, for example. In the Netherlands, we have a butterfly organization who is training mowers or contractors, and when they have done this training, they get a kind of color statute that they have successfully ended this training. But we at Rijkswaterstaat are not yet so far that we ask contractors to have this kind of training. But we are thinking about it.
Anders?
Yeah. Another problem that I have discovered is that in Sweden, at least, most of the biggest portion of our roads are small roads. This means also that the roadworthies are small, but the machinery used is often adapted to big roads. So the machinery used are not adapted to the situation, actually, and that's also a big problem in Sweden, at least.
Hans Martin?
Yeah. Did you say that you already had this training structure in place in Denmark?
I think it's just started. It's a bit like it's contractors, and then they contacted the people and said, "Are you positive about this? Will you be interested?" And they said yes. And I'm going to a meeting. Well, I'm self-employed, but I'm going to the meeting with the road directorate and with the guy who's in charge of that. And I'm going to ask him how things are going. So this is probably the first year they're doing it. But I must say that we are sort of a small team of self-employed people, and one of them, he is a botanist, and he's doing the maintenance. So he has the machinery. And the road directorate have asked him to do some maintenance plans who can sort of be broadened out and act as an inspiration also to the municipalities in Denmark. So it's all starting in Denmark, but we're all sort of a team who thinks we want this, and we're willing to, well, go pretty far for it. So it's just starting, like in Holland, right?
Wouldn't the training need to be very varied? I mean, butterflies are only one small part of the story.
Well, our dream is basically that, you know, you have a management plan, but if you're out there and you see some flowering plants, low flowering plants, then maybe you could just, you know, drive around them and then go on. But you need to know a bit about, plants. So we just want the flowering plants because, they host the insects. And basically it's also to get the grass, because we have, obviously we have the grass problem too. So it's to limit the grass and get more flowering plants out of it.
Most of the general public think that grass is great. So maybe there's a need for some education.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because as a researcher, I see the need for local adjustment of management plans, and without this step, that's almost impossible, I guess. So with education, that could be one step.
Marguerite?
We have another issue is that we have a good part of our highway network with very, very high daily traffic. So we're talking about above 80,000 vehicles a day. And most of our highway network is just 4 lanes, so 2 lanes, 2 lanes. And so this means when we are doing the mowing, we have to close a lane, which we cannot do during the day. So a lot of our maintenance is at night. And this is also making it complicated. So that's why I say keep it simple, because we really have to, we can't go and look if there's flowers. It has to be set from this kilometer to this kilometer, you do it this way. Because at night, obviously they have strong lights, but imagine working in with those conditions. Are other people faced with this problem?
Yes, Anne-Marie.
I have a comment on that. Because a lot of tractors today, they have GIS systems. And we have been asked, when we do monitoring along road verges now, we put a GIS point where we think the rare species are or where they should avoid to mow. But in a way, I've been against it because we know sometimes plants, they move too. So this is the first year we're going to do something like that, and then we'll see what happens. But it's again, you need to think that a lot of the modern machines have GIS. So if you're able to do GIS, and if you remember to update the layer and put it in the right way, then it could help the people mowing. But again, it's all in the thinking in Denmark. So.
Yes, Tuan?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it also is necessary to prioritize the hotspots that you have in your main road system so that you can have a different way of managing these hotspots in according to the other places that have less biodiversity or less potential chance to grow and enhance biodiversity. So I do agree with you that the contractors have GIS systems, and if you have the good spots on the map, then you can alternate the mowing regime.
Could I ask, is it just about the hotspots, or should we be thinking about the second best, as Hans Martin was saying earlier, the second best verges, should they also be on our list?
I didn't say it yet, but no, we have talked quite a lot about hotspots, but I would like to see a more focus on like the next best road verges, as I think they're kind of the, let's say, call it restoration of those could be quite cost effective. But you could still fit that into some GPS approach. But a question for that: who will then, who has the responsibility to make these go out and fill in the numbers in the system?
We have a question from online.
So we have a question from Geo Hilding in Sweden. I'm going to try to see if I can get him to speak. Can you try to?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us, Geo?
Now again?
Can you hear me, is the question.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, I want to pick up on something that sort of relates to what we have been talking about, and also back to the previous workshop, because it was one or two comments there from the previous workshop that said, okay, but we need to keep this simple in order to make it functional. It shouldn't be, as I perceived it, it shouldn't be too short sections of the road to have special management, and it shouldn't be too much details in the management, because we need to to make this functional within the current system, sort of. And I want to address this question mainly to you in the panel that represent road managers and agencies, because I also see that the road verges, they actually are important assets. Not only, I mean, it's not only grassland and grassland species in general, but actually what we have seen in Sweden at least is that they actually are relatively rich also compared to other important nature conservation habitats. So it's not like just any habitats. They are really valuable in a societal perspective and in a larger conservation perspective. So to what degree should we actually let those assets be limited by the current limitations or current organization of road and railway administrations? Is it even the responsibility and, well, the economic responsibility only of the transport administration, the road and railway managers, to deal with these important assets? I hope you understand my question.
I think so. I mean, but I think now we have the road owners themselves asking what's the best practice. So they're actively engaging in how to improve things. So who wants to take this?
Well, I think you're making a good point. Regarding the question whether the road authorities are responsible or could there be someone else responsible, we own the land as the government, so we are responsible for those areas, at least in Germany. I don't know how it is in other countries, but so that makes us responsible. The way of thinking that these, or that the road verges are considered an asset is, I think, the right thing to do, or the right thing to think, but it's just a very recent development, at least in Germany, because I think it started more or less with the whole, you know, when this study came out about the insect disappearance in 2017, that's when I think in Germany, at least in Germany, there was a big hype for insect conservation. And then people discovered that road verges could actually be an asset and could be used for insect conservation. So there were a lot of governmental programs that came out that specifically targeted verges. The problem is that we have these programs, but it hasn't increased the resources for the maintenance depots. So they are faced now, or they have this challenge now that they have some kind of pressure, political pressure, and also I think public pressure to use these verges as assets, but they don't have the capacity most of the time. It differs a little bit between the states, the federal states, so Bavaria, and that is coming back to what we had earlier about the discussion whether we should consider like all road verges or just hotspot verges. So they have a new maintenance system where they have an ecological mowing regime, which they use on all verges. So they mow in sections. And then they have 20%, I think, of the area which they have, you know, assigned as like special hotspots. So these are treated very differently. And as far as I know, they're also treated not from road maintenance, but from like third companies. So that would be a way, I think, to go forward. So what we try to do now in Germany, and I think what we also would like to target with the guidelines, is that we need to find a system now which is easily applicable and which can be done by maintenance right now without spending much more resources, at least. I mean, I'm hoping that at some point we will get more resources, but currently that is just not the case.
I think Pia stressed a very important point, and that is we have had the same development as you in Germany. They discovered that especially pollinators could live in the road verges, and then they expect us to deliver species richness to no cost. But that's not true. That will cost money, and they have to give us money to do that, because otherwise we will never achieve what we can do, because we have the knowledge, or we have building up the knowledge now, but we need resources to do this. And that's a big problem, at least in Sweden, and I think in Germany, perhaps everywhere.
Yes, it's the same in Austria, that the motorway company also does not feel responsible. I mean, it's their property, but they don't see why they should increase biodiversity to their own costs, because they are a motorway company and not nature conservation. So we do have the same discussion in Austria.
In terms of resources, I had a sort of a difficult experience, because I thought, apart from the biodiversity hotspots, that by extensifying management we could actually have a win-win situation where we're actually saving resources and having something much more, less incentive, better for nature. And this worked on stretches where we had very little pressure from invasive plants. And when we were doing our inventory of the biodiversity hotspots, we actually asked the maintenance crews not to do any mowing until end of September for the whole network, except for the intensive zone, which for safety reasons we had to do. And on many stretches, the invasive plants just exploded. And other stretches, it was fine, and it's actually, it was very interesting to see how the vegetation evolved. But this is a very big challenge, how to balance the different problems we have with these verges.
What about the complexity and the simplicity? So you're all saying that it should be a simple system, but can it not be simple but complex? I mean, could you not have perhaps 3 or 5 regimes and then just vary them around geographically different parts of the network?
I think you have to talk with the maintenance. You have to include the maintenance crews from the very, or the people, whether who are planning the maintenance from the beginning, because it can be. It doesn't have to be super simple, but it has to be manageable for them. And I think that depends on local conditions. It's hard to set a rule on that. But to give an example, we had an enlargement of a road, and we had reptile specialists say how they should do the shoulders. And they were putting in reptile refuges here and there. And between the signalization, so the posts, and these reptile regimes, it was impossible for a machine to work that stretch. And I thought, well, why didn't we put those reptile refuges where the posts are? So that you combine, from a maintenance point of view, different constraints, you combine them, things like that.
And since we came up with the invasive species, I would actually, I would like to ask you a question, or I would like to have your opinion on something, because we have these guidelines now, and we have some methodology for controlling invasive species in there. One of the methods is not very well tested yet, and we don't actually know whether it works. So I would like to have your general opinion on whether you find it sensible to put such methodologies in guidelines, because it would be the same for our bison handbook currently that we're writing, or should we rather stick to like methodology that we know that works but is very exhausting, or should we encourage through these guidelines testing new methodologies with a note of caution saying, we don't know if it works.
This goes to the whole area of innovation. I mean, Anne-Marie was talking about burning. It's being tested in Denmark. Seems like might be a good idea, but it's not tested yet, or not confirmed. Is a mic here?
Is it working? Yeah. Wiene Bakker of Wageningen University is now performing a research in the Netherlands, and I think that there are some differences between the countries that are all together in the CEDR work group and haven't produced this guideline, so you cannot use the same guidelines on every situation. Wiene Bakker told us this morning in his presentation that in our verges, which are sometimes very broad, the production has risen in the last 10 or 20 years because of a change of management, a reduction of mowing regimes, and also because of the changing of the temperature, which allows the grass to dominate above the flowers. So we have a big problem on a really large scale for the productive grasslands, which are losing biodiversity. So we try now to put it back, to enhance biodiversity by having these experiments to show in which pastures or which grassland types you have to mow in a different way, earlier or later, or high or low, or maybe on a different date. So in 2 years, Wiene will finish these experiments, and we can try to figure out how it works in a productive environment. This doesn't mean that one-time mowing is not good for low productive situations.
So should something experimental be put in the manual, in the guideline? With a note of caution, perhaps?
That would be a good idea.
I think the guideline should sort of say what the state of the knowledge is. So if we don't know, but to experiment, and I think that would be good. But we have to be careful that people don't think this is state of the art, but just state of the knowledge.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. I wake you up. I agree. In Sweden, we have a situation where we have a big problem with the garden lupins. We have it in, let's say, we have 100,000 kilometers of road network. The road network is 100,000 kilometers. And in 7% of that is appointed as species rich. And in 80% of this, 7%, we already have the garden lupins. So I think we need to test new methods, but in the guideline there should perhaps be how to make it, as you say, a study, because it must be controlled. Otherwise it just be, it seems to work, or another guy says, no, it didn't work, and so on.
I can see a little text box with a different color coming with a health warning. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I agree on that, because apparently tools are being developed now, and at least in Denmark we've got our, new thoughts about how to do it in another way, and even though the road directorate is sort of, asking me to do some little baselines analysis, this is going to be developed over the future years. So I think this should be set somewhere. This is what we know works for now, and then maybe it could be mentioned that, we know that somebody's working with even grazing in Denmark. They're talking about so grazing, fire, so when people because it is a when people read this, then they will sort of know that, well, you know, or we know that this is just the beginning, and if I want to know more about fire or grazing, I should, well, Google or you know, get to call a friend or whatever. So I think it's important to say that new tools will be developed. We also, well, we in Denmark, I've also been asked to monitor vegetation height when you mow it. So short vegetation height, a bit higher. So it's still low, but it might save more amphibians, for instance. So they're also looking at that right now. That project started this year, so a lot of things in Denmark have just started. And the results won't come out till 5 years, at least.
So perhaps we should include things that appear to be looking good.
Yeah.
That show promise. Go ahead.
Well, there's also an environmental pressure occurring now. We have dry summers, and in these dry summers we have noticed that there are a lot of roadside fires. And if you have still a lot of standing crop because of your late mowing date, then these road fires might be occurring more often, and they have a larger risk of having giving problems for the fire workers, but also for the traffic. It means lots of hours of people standing on the road without traveling, but also it has an additional effect or risk that the fire might be spread to the natural environment in the surroundings. So I do think there's also an environmental necessity to improve your management, not only to enhance biodiversity, but also to make it more safe.
Could I ask the panel about noise barriers? Because I got the impression at the workshop yesterday that nobody knows how animals respond to noise barriers.
Well, there's been studies and quite a bit of implementation and mitigation in Switzerland. So if you're talking about birds, we know how to mitigate transparent noise barriers. And when they're a barrier. So on verges with biodiversity, for instance, reptiles, they're a definite barrier. And then there was presentations yesterday with these gabion systems that function. If you put the gabions at the foot, the lizards and snakes can get through. So there is studied mitigation.
I mean, there seems to be very little evidence of how much animals, insects, for example, are affected by noise. Does it really matter to them that much?
We don't have any legislation to protect nature against noise in Switzerland, so we haven't implemented anything, I'm afraid.
We have done a bit of work about noise in birds, like Germans have. We also collaborated in that some years ago, but basically we are using the German guidelines. But for us in Austria, it's socially not accepted to put noise barriers for protecting animals. It's very difficult because the discussion starts that we put them for animals but not for the people. And we also experienced, although it was not about noise mitigation, but we had a green bridge that was built at the existing motorway network due to our defragmentation requirements. And the local people were not willing to accept it until they received their noise protection screens for their houses. And then they were happy and everything worked out wonderfully. So I think with all these mitigations, it's also always to take into account the social impact and the acceptance of the people who live there. Because at least in Austria, the understanding for biodiversity is, and nature protection is not very high at the moment. It's maybe starting to increase again, but in the last 10 years it was not accepted that we are having so strict laws for, especially for the species protection and not for human protection.
Could I take the opportunity?
Somehow came off the topic you asked.
Could I take an opportunity to ask about personal preference? What about hedgerows? I mean, is anybody interested in hedgerows except Ireland and the UK?
No, go ahead.
No, I didn't hear. I was thinking on what in Sweden we have looked into this matter as well, noise and birds, and we did an inventory where we looked for areas where we have threatened species and noise above, I think it was 50, 55 decibel, and it ended up in so many areas that it's impossible to handle, and as you say, what to do? And there we stand now. I think we have a big problem, but we don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, regarding your question with hedgerows, we are starting to look into that. So we did some studies on the dormouse, I think it's called in English. And it turns out that in Germany, in some places, actually the dormouse is only found in hedgerows along roads and not in a landscape anymore, because the hedgerows are that kind of habitat is only available along roads, at least long stretches, so we don't have these long hedgerows in a landscape anymore. So it could actually be good to plant or hedgerows along roads. The other thing that there is currently a project in Germany, I don't know very much about it, I just found out about it, where they look at the CO2 binding capacity or carbon binding capacity of hedgerows. And it could actually be also have a good impact on the climate if we plant a lot of hedgerows. It would be an alternative to mires. So yeah, it could be an alternative. The one thing that I think road maintenance, they don't like that idea because especially with the dormouse, it's a protected species. So every time they need to do maintenance, they have a problem.
We have a comment from Jo.
Use the mic.
We have another comment from Jo, and he's saying, in addition to hedgerows, we have tree rows, which also have large biodiversity values.
So the older stretches of highways in Switzerland had actually on the verges mostly hedgerows, and we kind of moved, I guess, when we started having impact statements in the 90s. So I'm talking about we really see a generation of landscaping in our highways. The first ones, a lot of hedges in the 70s, 80s, and then with the impact statement, the idea came, we have to have these low nutrient grasslands in the 90s, and that's how we landscaped. And now we're finding that that doesn't work so well in certain cases because of the invasive species. And so now we've done some research to see how can we landscape our roadsides so that we don't have this problem with the invasive species, where there's a lot of them. And we're going to be turning back towards hedgerows in different areas. Because shading will avoid the invasion. Yeah.
This leads very nicely to another pet topic of my own. In Ireland, we had shrews on the roadside, and they attracted owls, barn owls, protected species, and it sounded very much like an ecological trap. So perhaps we could have some comments on this whole issue of ecological traps. Sorry, Pia. Go ahead, Twan.
Is it about barnholes in Ireland? In the Netherlands, we have also a lot of mice in the verges. I do think because the predation pressure is less, because, for example, in the middle verge, you have not any predators you can find for the mice, so sometimes you find a big population. On the side verges, it attracts a lot of barnholes, and we have done some experiments by putting poles in the verges where the barnholes usually go sit, but these poles are turning, so they have to move away from the road, and then we put poles a bit higher on the side of the verges, which are sitting poles for the barnholes, so we try to move them a bit away from the traffic, and that has been experimented. I can maybe add some link to this study, but it's practiced in quite a lot of roads in the Netherlands in open landscapes.
Does it appear to work?
Yeah, it did work.
Regarding the trap, I must say I don't really believe in it. So we've done studies on, again, the dormouse, birds, and 2 butterfly species. We don't find any evidence for trap effects. And I think, now I looked very much into what's available for insects, and I think Hans Martin can confirm that there's not very much done on it. Because it's very difficult to get a grasp on the trap effect because you need genetic data. So, it's very sad if an individual dies in traffic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a threat for the population, right? So when we do, I think if we maintain the road verges and we want to enhance biodiversity, we should think about where we really want to have hotspots. So we don't want that on verges that are only 1 meter wide. We would like to have that on verges that are wide enough for actually presenting a good habitat. But considering, we had another study where we looked, for example, in a 20,000 hectare area in a very agricultural landscape, and there we could see that the road verges were very species rich. There were protected species there, and they had, in most cases, much, even if you had the same habitat type in the landscape, it was usually better on the road verges and species richer than in the landscape. So these are really the last kind of nature places there are in such areas. So again, I don't really believe in this trap effect. I don't know about birds. The birds that we looked at reproduction success. And we didn't find any differences to breeding sites in the landscape.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a small contribution from my PhD work, because we had a similar landscape, and this was in Australia, where it was heavily fragmented, and a lot of the remnant vegetation was within road verges or property lines. And at that time I was working with bats, and we actually studied the activity and species composition of bats in proximity to the road, and we found that it decreased quite dramatically, quite significantly with proximity to the road. So even though this remnant tree vegetation was beside the road, and we had what we thought was functional habitat for the bats, they weren't existing in the roadside verge. So, or they weren't as active in the roadside verge as away from the road. So it could be having an effect on the bats in that space.
So it wouldn't apply to bats, but might apply to other things.
Yeah, sure. But just to add that 2 cents.
I would say in terms of the evolution of the CEDR report, the first draft had a lot of talk about ecological traps. The second draft out now mentions it a little bit. Should we remove it altogether? Anders? No. Marguerite?
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I would, I vote for not remove it at all. Not totally, I mean, sorry. I think it's good to have something in it, and if it's only that it says it's no proof for it. It's, for us in Austria, we are still a bit in this. We are not planting shrubs or anything at the road verges to not attract birds. So we still discuss this topic, so it would be great to have something in the guidelines. But the second challenge we have is what Pia mentioned, if it is protected species. And then when you have to do maintenance or if you have to do some works at the road, then it's getting complicated. At least that is the opinion of the lawyers in Austria, and that's what frightens us. So there are also some votes saying everything but no protected species.
I would keep the theme of the ecological traps there, because we really also have seen that where we have very large shoulders with grass, with very large mice population, and with the salt, the snow leaves these shoulders also earlier than in the landscape. We can have quite a few concentrations of birds of prey. And what we probably need to do is just study it more. Because, for instance, the Swiss Ornithological Institute, independently of us, was looking at, I think, the eagle owl, and realized that the Swiss population was absolutely not sustainable. Our population had not dropped because we were getting eagle owls coming in from other countries. But the mortality on our high-tension lines, which I knew of, and on the roads, is actually a sink. We're functioning as a sink in Switzerland. So sometimes it's also knowing where to get the information.
Could I change the subject and ask about the corridor effect? We talk a lot about roads being an ecological corridor potentially, and in the report it talks about patches of habitat and how far away they might be from each other and that kind of thing. Can a chain of patches be an effective corridor?
Yeah, it can, for some species. But that's the tricky part. It depends, varies quite a lot between species and species groups. How they are able to use patches and how far apart they can be and all that. So
doesn't that make everything very complicated in terms of maintaining the roadside?
Yeah. But it's always tricky because you manage the roadsides for like communities, not single species. So it's patches are better than nothing, but stretches may have better effects. It varies quite a lot between species how they use the landscape.
Okay. So we've talked for about an hour. Do we have any other issues? Yes, please.
Excuse me. I'm not an expert in roadside vegetation. I'm also not a biologist, but I was just thinking. Is it also an opportunity to reduce the frequency of maintenance? For example, that you go for more to a natural succession to forests. It can also be like trees can go in competition to the invasive species. You can also use after 10, 20 years, you can cut the trees, you can use it as a green energy. And also, I was also thinking about carbon storage, natural carbon storage. So instead of only mowing, maybe could be an opportunity, especially for the verges with very low biodiversity.
This goes back to the hedgerow idea, I guess, to promote woody species.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your question. In our country, we have safety reasons not to have grown up vegetation in the first 13 meters outside the roadside. We call it an obstacle-free zone. So we are mowing just to conserve the safety of in case a car or vehicle gets out of the road, it must stop in a grassy vegetation without any accidents, we hope. So we have a design requirement of 13 meters of not having any wooden patches. That's one reason, that's a safety reason. And for your suggestion to storage carbon dioxide, for example, we are trying to have a green wood strategy and to have a look where beyond this 13 meters you can find space to eventually plant trees, but it's very scarce to have such a broad verges where you can really grow a big, robust, fast forest. There stays less room, but we are searching for it. But on the other hand, you get a competition between grassland, which Pia already explained, in intensively agricultural landscape. These grasslands host a lot of species, not only plants, but also invertebrates, mice. We've all heard all kind of examples. And in forest, if you have less space, then you hardly get any huge forest, which is an habitat for the complete community of species that belong there. It will be a remnant or a bit, how you call it, a bit a lane structure or something, but not a real forest that you have all kind of different layers in it and different growing systems. So it's hard to find enough space to grow a real wooden system, I do think, but maybe you have some different opinion about it.
No, I mean, I agree. In Germany, our ministry doesn't like to hear trees and roads in one sentence, except for if you say we cut all the trees, especially for safety reasons. And the other thing, as Tuan also pointed out, is I think we would lose a lot of potential because we can actually use these areas for like open habitats. And we should, I think, in Germany, verges make about 3% of the whole country area, which is comparable to our nature conservation sites. They are about 3.9%. So verges have a great potential to enhance biodiversity. And regarding the maintenance, so I think if we do it right and we create nutrient-poor habitats, we can also decrease the maintenance. So currently the practice is that maintenance goes out twice a year. If they're invasive species, they go out 8 to 10 times a year and more. But if they would actually start, and the current practice in Germany is unfortunately mulching, so they just leave the biomass behind. And I've been trying to convince people that if you actually take away the biomass, then you take away nutrients, and eventually you will end up with a nutrient-poor roadside, which might not actually need that much maintenance. So you might only go out once a year. So we can also, with these kind of biodiversity enhancing methods, decrease decrease maintenance on the long term. Unfortunately, that is sometimes very difficult to get through to the road authorities, because long term is something that they don't. I mean, they only hear that now it will be more time, more work and more effort to take away the biomass. It will be more costs. And if you tell them, like, in, I don't know, 5 years or so, you only go out once a year, that's, I don't know, they don't think that that's very beneficial, or I don't know what, I always get the answers, it's too expensive now.
I think we're going to be faced with new challenges with climate change. We've had roads that buckled under the heat. Not this year, but 2 years ago, I think. And where now our road authorities don't really like trees next to roads, maybe in a few years they'll be looking for some shading. It's to be seen. But there is definitely, like, where we have trees next to road, we have to have guardrails. That's obvious. And we have the safety can't be larger than 10 centimeters in diameter, so it can't be a large tree, it can be shrubs. But yeah, I think we'll have to see how things evolve.
Yes, about trees and hedgerows and such things in the road verges, in most of Scandinavia, I would say, or at least in northern Scandinavia, the road verges is used to store snow during the winter, so it's not possibility. But we have trees, and that's a cultural heritage from old roads, mostly. And we try to keep them because they are very species rich. It's a big portion of where we have old trees with big dimensions. So we try to manage them and keep them living as long as possible. Most of them are very old already. But there is, as Tony pointed out, security reasons, so they can't be at roads where we have a lot of traffic or high speed. So they can only be with small roads with low speed.
Yeah, obviously with the climate change, we have more storms and trees tend to fall across roads. So obvious issues there. Yes, Anne-Marie.
Right, I've got 2 points on my list, so I'd really like to know if I should make it short or long. But first of all, road verges, they are different. I mean, like, we have the ones for safety reasons, and personally I think they should be managed in another way than the ones that are a bit further away. And the reason why I think that is also the maintaining people. If you go as a specialist, which I am, to the road directorate maintaining people and tell them that, no, they go absolutely berserk and they think you're crazy. So in order to reach into the people who has to take responsibility for this, I always start by saying, well, the first 2.5 meters from the asphalt and then into, that's for you to maintain, and then it's for the road director to decide how to mow and stuff. But for the next, we have sort of thought of dividing it into open land, bushes and shrubs, and trees. And the road directorate, they are talking about veteranizing trees, because you have, where all the junctions are, you have some areas with trees, and some of them have needed to take them out. But well, in Denmark they love the trees, so they've decided we want to keep some of them, and we want to do a lot for the biodiversity by making them older, even though they are just 50 years old. And I like, from what I hear from you, it's like road verges. It's just a math, but for me it's different. Like I said, you have the first meters where you shouldn't have anything apart from mowing or whatever, and then there's the other thing behind. Because they should be seen, I think personally, they should be seen differently and treated differently. So it's in order to get a message through also to the people who maintain it.
So at the moment, the CEDR document doesn't address safety because it's a minefield.
Yeah.
So we're just talking about what's good for biodiversity, and it's for the road owner to decide priorities.
But I don't know if you can, but because of course there shouldn't be any hedges and trees where the cars are supposed to be when they have the motor breakdown or whatever. But in Denmark, well, when you cross an area of Denmark, you have forest on both sides, and some of the trees, they go down on the road verges. And then when they, enlarge the road, then they simply just take them away. But till then, they have worked as a green corridor for trees or for animals who lives in the trees. So, okay, you haven't taken that into consideration, but maybe it's not for this report, but maybe for another one, because it had made the people who maintain in the road directorate, it had made them more positive about sort of introducing these ideas. As long as they know that these 2.5 meters, we know that the species competition are also different along these areas than inland. Well, I know, right? But so it makes sense to me that they maintain in the way they want to, and then we do a lot of we do the big difference between, because then the internal people who has to deal with it, they can bring it on in the organization. And again, this is a big boat we need to turn. The biodiversity boat needs to come into the road directors of Europe or of the world, and they're mostly engineers and not that positive about biodiversity. So if we can do it like, this is for you to decide, and then we decide here, then they are a bit more positive about it.
I mean, I think it's not explicitly stated in the guideline, but it's assumed that the area immediately adjacent to the road will be intensely mowed.
Yeah.
And we talk about ecotones that go from there further back.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was about to add that. I mean, we don't talk about these first 1.5 meters or whatever, because that is, like Tuan mentioned, it's the safety zone and they have to mow it twice a year. And we don't, I honestly believe that we don't want to have like very biodiversity hotspots in that area either, because you have a lot of pollution, you have, you are very close to the road track. So no, we're talking about what is behind that zone.
I read the guideline and I didn't pay attention, but you do have to say what you're considering and what you're not considering in the guideline. So if you're excluding that zone, you have to specifically say, this does not, we are excluding this zone. It has to be said somewhere and towards the front.
Fair point. Anything else?
Yes, and then I had my second point, that's wildblumenmix. How do you propose to document that? Well, if you know that some of the areas have been sown when they were produced, when they were made, these road verges, because we have the same, like if you want to prioritize maintenance on these hotspots, should you prioritize hotspots who are artificial and started with sown flowers, or should you maintain areas, or should you prioritize area where you know that the botany or whatever the species have come from the local? It's mostly plants, right? But again, till now in the form we are developing at the Road Direct for the time being, we take that into account too. I don't know how the road directorate then will sort of prioritize, but we will use that as a tool too, because well, the theory is that if it has sort of come in naturally, then it will also exchange naturally, and maybe it's better than just the sowing, but still you have some pretty nice areas, hotspot areas, which, well, were basically started with sowing, and then somehow it was maintained in the right way, so they're still there after 20 years.
So the assumption in the document is that some people will sow, perhaps because of a fear of invasive species or perhaps for other reasons, and in other situations you might allow it to colonize naturally. Yeah. And both are considered fine. And you prioritize on the basis of what's there. However it got there, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
And I mean, regarding the seed mix, in Germany, we can only now use regional certified seed mixes. So it's, I mean, it's not artificial. But I think I had this discussion with someone yesterday with like a natural colonization. I think if you have, like if the landscape around you has a lot of potential, then you should not use any seed mixes. But if you, like in agricultural land, you should use them, and certainly you should use them if you have, if there are any invasive species.
I think we have a comment from Geo.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
So we have somebody online trying to talk?
Yeah. Geo, do you want to try?
Yeah, I tried to speak.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on about this, what you call the safety zone, because clearly you have to have the priorities right. And for that reason, you have to deal with that. But I don't think that it would be wise to exclude that from the guidelines altogether, because as from my experience at least, the shoulder or the nearest meter or whatever, it might be actually quite special in biological terms. A rather extreme environment which can actually be positive for quite some species. Maybe that's even where much of the biodiversity is, which you cannot really neglect. And so for that reason, I don't think it would be good to exclude that altogether.
Yes, Pia.
I can see your point. I mean, what you find there is especially salt-tolerant species sometimes, like apparently really rare ones. But, I mean, there is this safety issue. So, I mean, I can't argue with road maintenance and tell them, like, you know, you have to mow a little bit earlier or a little bit later. So if you have species with shoulders, just because they go out and mow twice a year, fine. But I mean, there's no way that we can encourage them to do like special treatments with this first 1.5 meters. I don't know if I understood you correctly, but
yes, you do. Yeah, you have that problem. Yes, but if I'm just saying, if there is where the biodiversity is, we have to relate to it in some way.
Okay. Thank you, Geo. I think we're running out of time, so if there's nothing else. Yes, Tuan.
Does it work? Yeah. Well, I'm the program manager from this Biodiversity Call 16. But what I heard about the safety from the verges, I'm also the program manager from another topic called 16, road safety. And one of the topics in that call was the safety of the verges. And that what I see now, what I hear is, and what I really worry about is don't give the people who do really the executive work for the verges, don't give them the feeling from competitive demands. Make it a little bit easy for them.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Yeah.
I think we, of course, have to have the security issue in mind, but I think it's the first law anyway. So the road verge is the road verge and it belongs to the road, and the first issue is the road safety. With no guideline from biodiversity increasement or whatever, we can interfere with that.
I think we can make a general statement at the start saying that this guideline is about the biodiversity, but of course there will be other factors, safety being a major one. If anybody doesn't have the link to the documents, there's a sign sheet at the front here, and also Charlotte will send it out to all delegates. So people who are not IANI members should have already gotten the links, but anybody who's a delegate but not an IANI membership, you can either put your name here or you can wait, and it will be sent out. So thank you all for your contributions, and thank you to our panel.